Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back to my channel, Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer with you guys. And today I'm going to talk about the opposition aspect between Venus and Pluto. I think there are a lot of you out there that would have some kind of Venus-Pluto aspect. I want to talk about the difference from an evolutionary perspective, the difference between an applying aspect and a separating aspect, because they have different um, evolutionary implications when Venus is applying or separating from Pluto. And I will bring up a chart in a moment. It's not a chart of anybody in particular. It's just going to show you Venus and Pluto opposite each other with nothing else in the chart, just so that I can get your attention honed in, just focused on this particular aspect. Before I do that, let's just cover some key points about Pluto in terms of evolution and one's evolutionary path. So first of all, Pluto in evolutionary astrology reflects the soul's desires, intentions, evolutionary path, and where the soul is at any given point in any given life. The more Pluto aspects somebody has in their birth chart, the more intensified the evolution is going to be. And you can test this out for yourself. You can just have a look at your own chart, have a look at charts of friends or just people that you know, and draw a difference between people who don't have a lot of Pluto aspects and people that do, in terms of their life story and what's unfolding. Now, I don't think one's evolution is not defined necessarily by a person, operating at a higher stream as opposed to a lower personality stream. Evolution is evolution, and it takes place in the lower spheres as much as it takes place in the higher spheres. So that's another point to keep in mind, because somebody might have a lot of Pluto aspects or Pluto Venus aspect, and it doesn't necessarily mean that their evolution is just filled with light, and they're transforming at these rapid rates where they are evolving at a rapid rate and relinquishing all limitations. Because essentially, when we're talking about Pluto aspecting Venus, for instance, what the soul is actually intending to do is it's intending to transform through the experience, osmosis of what takes place in personal relationships. Venus has two sides to her. There's an internal side and an external side, you could say, which is the Taurus and the Libran archetypes, because Venus rules Taurus and Libra, which is why there are two sides to her within all of us. So the Taurus component is very much our own self-worth. And the Libran component is very much how we relate and share, love, and listen to others. Venus has this component, this function to her, that really shows us our own capacity of being able to listen to our own inner levels and dynamics and experiences and messages and all sorts of things. And at the same time, it's also reflecting the ability to be able to listen to other people. Anytime we step into the Libran zone, the point of that archetype and that experience is to be able to step into a zone with another person and to be able to be a part of that, standing in it, but to have the ability to hear, right? To understand, to listen to the other person. So Venus has these two different expressions to her pertaining to the Taurus and Libran archetype. So Venus opposite Pluto, I'll just make a few comments on a mundane, basic sort of level. And then I'll get into the applying and separating aspect, and then I'll just touch on more of the evolutionary perspectives of a Venus-Pluto opposition. But in basic terms, when a person is, let's just say that they are operating more from personality level, and this is in regards to a Venus opposite Pluto, right? I will say this, so let me just backtrack. Um, the hard aspects play out in the same way in terms of the volume of the intensity that's involved with the transformation, transmutation, and the removal of stagnation. The soft aspects are also working on that evolutionary path where the person is still transforming, um, but not through cataclysmic events. So the difference between hard aspects and soft aspects, forget about applying and separating for a moment, just hard aspects and soft aspects, is that with the hard aspects, the person is going to have super intensified cataclysmic experiences and events that take place. And then they can also have periods of isolation and withdrawal, really intense periods of isolation and withdrawal, where there's a very intense internal psychological analysis and process going on for the individual wanting to understand themselves better. So there can be this, magnetic, intense desire to want to be in a relationship, to want to be with a partner. And then equally at different times, there can be the desire to need to withdraw and isolate oneself as well. So there can be those two extremes when it comes to the hard aspects. When it comes to the cataclysmic events that take place, which are, they can be anything from the death of a partner, an abusive relationship, the experience of power and disempowerment, the experience of power games, control, manipulation, abuse, all those things come under the umbrella of a Venus-Pluto hard aspect. So when the person goes through these really intense cataclysmic events through hard aspects from Venus to Pluto, it is frequently the case that the person, particularly when they're younger, a lot of factors will come into this in terms of different ways of understanding this from the point of view of if you're talking about a 20-year-old person versus a 50-year-old person who's obviously had a lot more life experience, then clearly their level of understanding, understanding, and their perception on things is going to be different from 20 to 50, generally speaking. So obviously you need to take into account a number of different factors in terms of when you're looking at this opposition. You need to look at the gender, you need to look at the age, you need to look at the person's orientation to life and their fundamental beliefs or philosophies or understanding or cosmological orientation to life in general. So all these are important factors. Obviously, culture, religion, nationality, all these things are going to feed into how this Venus-Pluto opposition is going to play out. But regardless of all those factors, when it comes to a Venus-Pluto opposition, which is a hard aspect which defines cataclysmic events, the person has these incredibly intense experiences connecting to some of the things that I mentioned a moment ago and lots of other things as well. And the key difference is that between hard and soft aspects is that when with the hard aspects, the individual doesn't quite understand why they need to go through these cataclysmic events, these experiences. They go through them and there might be a lot of resistance that comes up because with the hard aspects, there's a tendency to resist what's trying to transform or transmute because it's not an easy process. It's not an easy experience. It's incredibly confronting, incredibly challenging, and it requires a death, some kind of death, which ultimately obviously leads to a rebirth. But we cannot have a rebirth until we have a death of some sort. So when the person goes through these really intense cataclysmic experiences and events, there's the ability to truly reflect and understand isn't there. So the experience is usually that of a lot of pain and suffering. Could be a lot of confusion, anger, disappointment, things like that are going to come up. But subsequently, and obviously this also does come back to, how much awareness and consciousness a person has as well. Um, Subsequently, the person is able to then look back and really understand why they did actually need to go through that really dark, intense relationship, if you like. I say dark because Pluto does rule things that are dark, and the darkest sort of side within us as well. It is, the planet that connects to the archetype of Scorpio, which then brings in all the issues of jealousy, control, manipulation, suspicion, trust issues, not able to trust your partner, being suspicious of him all the time, or her for that matter. Those sorts of issues come up very, very strongly with Pluto Venus hard aspects. So this can be various cycles that a person goes through throughout their entire life, but with an opposition specifically. Now, the conjunction and the square and the Queen Cups are going to have a different mode of expression and experience somewhat. So I'm just specifically speaking to the opposition today. With the opposition, the most powerful thing about the oppositional aspect, first of all, it's regarded to be the second most powerful aspect in terms of traditional aspects, right? The Ptolemaic traditional system of aspects. The first strongest aspect is the conjunction, and the second one is the opposition. The beauty of the opposition is that it ultimately holds the potential for crystal clear awareness, enlightenment. It's the aspect of the opposition is reflective of the full moon. It's the same principle, it's the same energy, same vibration. It lights up everything that's there so that you can see it. But the point is this, so as when you are very, very young, oppositions especially, they become this polarized energy. So in the case of Venus Pluto, you are the Venus because that's the personal planet in this picture, and Pluto becomes this force that is felt and seen outside of you and is projected outside of you and is projected onto the opposite person to you. And clearly, when you're younger and you're not even in relationships, this aspect will be projected onto even family members, even your brothers and sisters, just one-on-one little interactions that you have with people. There's this experience of Venus Pluto that emerges. And it's when we are so young and we have not integrated these dynamics, these energies, these cosmic forces, and we are projecting them, there is a purpose to that, and part of that purpose is that as we are growing and evolving and developing and learning to understand our own nature better, this projection business takes place because it enables us to experience this this aspect. For example, the experience of Venus Pluto. So the Pluto gets projected onto the other person. Now, that on a lower astral personality level, Venus opposite Pluto can be a very dangerous aspect because I'll just use an example. So again, there's literally millions of examples that I could use, but this is just one. So let's say you have a 5-year-old girl who has a Venus opposite Pluto opposition. And I'm going to use a dark example because I just want to demonstrate the power of this aspect, okay? Now, this little girl is born into a family where the father is absent, the mother has a boyfriend, she's in this relationship with him. She's not able to see or recognize that he's a perpetrator. So this Venus-Pluto opposition for this little girl can play out in the way where this boyfriend, for example, he can be the abuser. right, towards this little girl. That's her Venus-Pluto opposition playing out. That's just one example. Um, and I know it's a very dark one, but I specifically gave you guys that example because I want you to understand the power of these energies and in the various and myriad of ways that they can play out. Now, the example I just gave, obviously there would be other contributing factors to that story, which would come through that child's entire chart and the mother's chart and the boyfriend's chart. There'd be a number of different things going on. But it is fair to say that a Venus-Pluto opposition can certainly manifest in those sorts of circumstances. That example aside, let's just go back to the Venus-Pluto opposition. As you are growing and developing and you start to then form relationships, personal relationships, the internal psychology is this. It brings up the matters of fear of abandonment, fear of loss, fear of betrayal, fear of being controlled, overpowered, and so forth, because the Pluto is being projected out there. So once the Pluto gets projected out there from that unconscious level, which is what we're talking about, it's an unconscious position. It's not like somebody stands there and says, oh, I'm just going to project my Pluto onto that person. It's not a conscious thing. It's very unconscious. And it is our unconscious projections and behaviors that create a lot of situations in life, let's just say. So once this Pluto is projected and it's happening unconsciously and the person doesn't have much awareness and really hasn't had much experience in relationships, it would be pretty typical to attract a partner who's very domineering, controlling, jealous, obsessive. Let's just say it was you and you're 20 years old and you've attracted this guy, and the initial attraction for you will be he'll have, let's just say, that mystique kind of quality, and he'll be a Plutonian type of person because it always plays out like that. I have a Venus-Pluto opposition in my chart, right? So I know this aspect literally. I've lived with it for many, many years. And all my relationships are described by this Venus-Pluto aspect. And obviously it's gone through different waves and different periods of growth and so on and so forth. But getting back to this 20-year-old person who hasn't had much experience at all, and projects that Pluto onto some male who will end up being, as I said, a Plutonian type of figure, whether that's he might be a Scorpio, he might be a Sun conjunct Pluto person, he might have Pluto on the ascendant, he might have Moon conjunct Pluto, he might have a Venus Pluto aspect himself. Something will be there because we draw and attract to us the very thing that enables us to evolve, even if we are repulsed by it and or attracted to it. And that is frequently the case. We attract the very things that do actually aid and assist our evolution. But evolution doesn't imply that everything's fine and dandy, especially when we're talking about hard aspects. So this person attracts this guy. He, in the initial stages, is really mysterious. He's got this real magnetic, charismatic character and personality. He's, just sort of luring her in. He's got this powerful presence, powerful energy vibration to him. That's Pluto. And this girl is just all, goo goo gaga eyed, just kind of, whoa, I'm like totally hypnotized by this particular individual. So she goes in really intensely because a Venus Pluto opposition, a Venus Pluto person, when they love, when they are attracted, it's all or nothing. We're talking about the Scorpio archetype. Pluto, the vibration of Pluto and Scorpio is very much all or nothing. There's no in between. So the person goes into the relationship really intensely, falls head over heels, has, all these experiences internally, excitement, intensity, passion, fear, a whole bunch of stuff is coming up. And then as time goes on, the person that she's attracted in ends up being maybe the person who's really controlling or really manipulative, or abuses her through sexual manipulation. All these things are possible. Sorry about the noise. So that's just one example. But when you have a Venus-Pluto opposition, you are always going to attract these really intense, cataclysmic relationships and situations. And sometimes they can be really short. It can be a one-night thing at times for people, or it can be obviously, really long relationships as well. But the point being that when you do attract somebody under this particular aspect, the volume of intensity is out of this world, and that's what keeps you in there. Attracted, um, obsessive, about the relationship or the person, all these things. The thing though with Pluto, because Pluto is the nature of Pluto is reflecting the soul and the desire to want to evolve through relationships. That's why it's aspecting Venus. Then the experience of these intensities that come through, it's not like they will ever necessarily end. At the same time, it doesn't mean that you'll always attract, people who are abusive or, domineering and so on and so forth. By the way, you too can be that. It doesn't just have to be um, the opposition doesn't always just have to be that the other person is Pluto and that's it. It'll be Pluto initially when you attract that person, male or female. And then once you're in there, this dynamic of Venus, Pluto, the polarization of these energies, it swings back and forth. So all these behaviors can also be inherent within you. So you too can be the one who might be an abuser, or who might be controlling, or so on and so forth. The experience of power and disempowerment is essentially inherent within this particular dynamic, this blend of energies, and it's necessary for the soul's evolution. One of the reasons is because what the soul is trying to do, its ultimate desire in this case, is to eliminate behaviors, attitudes, perceptions, beliefs, attachments that you've accumulated over God knows how many lifetimes. Now you're at a stage where your soul needs to actually eliminate any of the behaviors, attachments, perceptions, beliefs, things like that. Whatever has gotten to a point in your evolution that is keeping you stagnant, Pluto now is wanting to release that, right? It's wanting to release any limitations. So it has to be an experience that's incredibly confronting. Otherwise, you're not going to release these limitations. You're not going to confront them. The confrontational component, which is very much an opposition, by the way, because the energies are polarized, what you are confronting in the other are actually very deep components of your own unconscious self. And the reason you are confronting them is because you have this oppositional aspect. So you attract a partner that brings up these dynamics so that you can see them very clearly in your own self as well. And it is through that awareness eventually, because the oppositional aspect ultimately holds, as I said, the potential for clear crystal illumination, awareness, clarity, right, of this particular dynamic that gets projected out there, but it's really my own vibration. It's my own soul's work of what I need to evolve through, what I need to actually release and shed and grow into. Okay, so that's a little bit about the opposition. Now, the hard aspects include the conjunction, opposition, square, and quincunx. Those are the traditional hard aspects. In any of those aspects, there will be cataclysmic type of events for the person in the world of relationships. All those aspects are confronting and challenging, but the the level of growth and evolution and transformation and transmutation that can come out of these aspects is very dramatic. A person who has a Venus-Pluto hard aspect does not have an easy life when it comes to relationships. But do they have the potential to evolve at a rapid rate? Yeah, they do. Do they have the ability to really investigate really deeply their own inner psychology about the Venusian component of themselves, which is what? Their self-worth, how they feel about themselves as a human being, as a soul, as a person. What sort of value and worth do you have of yourself? This is what Venus shows us. So her sign, her aspects, etc., all speak to that as well. The soft aspects also reflect the evolutionary journey of the soul, but the soft aspects do not bring up cataclysmic events. The soft aspects bring up the transformation in a much more fluid, flowing kind of manner. So with soft aspects, there's almost never any resistance because there's a sense of harmony, there's a sense of integration, and not only that, there's a psychological and emotional and spiritual connection and understanding to what is actually taking place, how I'm actually evolving and transforming through these planetary energies. Pluto trine Venus, for example, that's a soft aspect. So the transformation is taking place, but it's not jolting the person out of their center and bringing forth incredibly intense, painful experience. It still will be intense, but not to the degree of the hard aspects. So hard aspects, difficult to understand when you're going through that cataclysmic event, why it's even happening. It is upon reflection that the person may gain some understanding and awareness about it. Soft aspects, there's no resistance, there's a flow, there's a sense of feeling supported in this transformational process, so you go with it willingly, there's no resistance. So that's the difference between the hard and the soft, very briefly put. Okay. I'll get to that in a minute. So what I want to do is now just speak to the applying and separating just want to make sure you can all see that, so I'll just pull it up again. Okay, so I've just drawn up a chart for, actually it was 18th of July of this year, and we had, Venus opposite Pluto, transiting Venus and transiting Pluto opposite each other. But this can be somebody's birthday, right? Somebody would have been born on that day. Many people would have. So they would be born into this configuration. Now, I realize the nodes are here and I probably should have taken them out actually, and I forgot last minute. So I'd just like you to not pay attention to the nodes because I'm not going to discuss them in this video today. But bear in mind that this opposition with Venus-Pluto on the nodes adds this whole other dimension to this particular opposition of Venus and Pluto, right? But for today's purpose, we're just focusing on the Venus-Pluto opposition. And I just need to show you, in case you are not aware of what an applying aspect is and what a separating aspect is. First of all, in traditional astrology, an applying aspect is said to have more intensity to it. A separating aspect is just as important, but it doesn't have the same intensity to it. Why? Because an applying aspect means there is a slower moving body catching up to a faster moving body. In this case, we can look at the example on the screen, Venus and Pluto. Now, out of these two bodies, the faster moving body is Venus, right? So what's Venus going to do? She's going to move much quicker, isn't she? She's actually, in this example, I have her at 17 degrees and 55 minutes of Cancer. In about 2 or 3 days' time, it's 18th of July there, by about the 21st or 22nd of July, she has moved forward and she's exactly opposite Pluto. And what you need to keep in mind is, first of all, that Pluto is the slowest moving planet. So its movement is always going to be really slow. And it happens to be retrograde as well. And planets moving retrograde generally move a lot slower as well. So you just need to be very aware of this, because you might be looking at an opposition between another two different planets, for instance, and one of them's neither of them are retrograde, and uh, there'll be some differences. So you just need to understand that Pluto is the slowest moving body, and when it is retrograde, it is moving even slower. Planets retrograde generally do move slower. Venus is an incredibly fast moving body, especially compared to Pluto. So this is what you see on the screen here is what's called an applying opposition. It's applying because Venus is at 17, Pluto is at 21. In 2 or 3 days' time, when Venus gets to 21 of Cancer, she will be exactly opposite Pluto, which is why it's called an applying aspect. She's applying to her exact opposition to Pluto. She's not there yet. But in terms of, if this was a natal chart, then it's an applying aspect, and the orb between these two is very small as well. This Venus, we could take her back to about 13 degrees. Some might even go less than that, and that would still be in opposition, even though she's at about 13 degrees of Cancer. Why? Because she's moving to closing into an opposition with Pluto. She's not there yet. Once she gets to 21 of Cancer, which brings her to the exact opposite point of Pluto, that is the point of her separation. So she begins to separate. Why? Because she's moving away from Pluto, which is why it's called a separating aspect. This principle applies to any two planets. Obviously, the faster moving body is always going to move away from, whether it's separating or applying, it's always going to be the faster moving body that's going to move away or merge towards. That's the difference between an applying and separating. And in traditional astrology, as I said, an applying aspect does seem to hold more weight in terms of its potency. Obviously, this might vary a little bit with some obscure aspects, for instance, but generally it would still be the same principle. The thing that might vary would be orbs and things like that, that you might use in obscure aspects. In obscure aspects, the orbs need to be a lot tighter and smaller, whereas with a conjunction and opposition, you can be 8 to 10 degrees of distance. The orb can be up to 10 degrees. And look, in evolutionary terms, I've seen some people use an orb of 14 to 15 degrees when you're talking about Pluto being conjunct the South Node, for example. So it depends. You have to find your own groove. You have to find your own way through this. And the way to do it is to consistently look at charts, consistently work with charts, and get your own sense of what's actually working, right? The different paradigms of astrology, the different fields, are all wonderful in their own way, and they will all teach you wonderful things. But at the end of the day, you have to find what resonates with you. It's always going to be that. Otherwise, you're just regurgitating everything you're reading, and that's it. And anyone can do that. So the art of astrology is really finding your own center with it and being able to integrate it and work with it personally yourself, right? So in evolutionary astrology, when it comes to Venus applying to Pluto or separating to Pluto, there's a different meaning to it. as opposed to just traditional astrology, because evolutionary astrology is underpinned fundamentally from concept of evolution, that we are always evolving. There's no beginning or end with that, by the way, and nobody could really um, define a beginning or an end, because we are infinite, right? There's this infinity of consciousness. There's no beginning and no end, but there is this experience of evolution that is also infinite. And the other thing is, when we try to frame things in the linear left brain perspective, we do that because we have this left brain, Mercury, Gemini mind. And from the point of view of being in a 3D reality here on Earth, we are surrounded by this concept of time. You know, there's so many hours in a day. There's so many days in a week. It's 3 o'clock now. It's going to be 4 o'clock in an hour. Blah blah blah. You know, our life runs around this so-called clock, which is ruled by the moon and Saturn, by the way. We'll get into that in another video. So the point I'm trying to make is that when we're wanting to understand our evolutionary journey, we have to get out of linear left brain thinking, because that keeps us trapped into wanting to define things from that time perspective. And the fact is, the soul is infinite, so there is no time. In truth, there is no time. In the real truth, the whole truth. Anyway, that subject is quite a large subject. I'll leave that there for now. So in evolutionary terms, when you have Venus applying to Pluto, the implication of that is that the soul may have had this Venus-Pluto dynamic going on in a previous life. Most likely it did, and it could have been many lifetimes actually, but it's still a fairly new dynamic and experience to the soul to have this Venus-Pluto opposition and to understand what this means from a soul level and to evolve through it. So it's a fairly new dynamic and energy for the soul. That's what the applying opposition means in evolutionary terms. When you see Venus separating, say you were born with Venus, let's just say that she was at 22 degrees of Cancer, right, which will be in a few days' time from this date that you see on the screen. Then she's already had her opposition before you were born, because she was the exact opposite Pluto before you were actually physically born, right? So you were born into a Venus-Pluto opposition, but she's separating. The separating aspect in evolutionary terms implies that this dynamic, this vibration, this energy, in evolutionary terms, of what your soul has been working through and is currently still working through, is something that the soul is familiar with. It recognizes this dynamic, this energy, this vibration. It's been working with it for a very, very long time. And the separating aspect, you could say, implies it's the soul is preparing to complete this journey, this evolution through this dynamic of Venus and Pluto. So that's the difference between an applying aspect and a separating aspect in evolutionary terms. And if you just break that down on a real life sort of level, you know, psychological, emotional level, it's like you know, if you go to a place that you're familiar with, right, a location, you walk into that space, and you know there's nothing that's potentially going to upset you or freak you out in any kind of way. You are really familiar with the space you're stepping into because you've been in there 1,000 times, which that's what makes us complacent, by the way. Anyway, and versus going into a territory that's completely unfamiliar to you. You're going to be on guard, you're going to be more cautious, more wary, more suspicious. These are some of the, this is another sort of analogy, if you like, for the applying versus separating from an evolutionary level. This is, and don't forget, Pluto is connected to our unconscious desires. So most of what's operating and happening internally that is unconscious is really challenging for us to understand on a conscious level. It takes a person to much as so actually the problem is I couldn't eliminate this stuff while I animate the chart, so I apologize for that. But I just wanted to show you, if you can just disregard everything else in the chart and just keep your eye on Venus and Pluto. So 18th of July, Venus is at that point where she's applying to Pluto. Now, if we go forward 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5, oh, sorry, I'm doing it by hours. I was wondering what the hell was going on there. Pardon me. Go back to days. Okay. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, so in 3 days' time after the date that I originally had there, this is her. It's not exact because to get it exact, we need to get the minutes exact, but I'm not going to play around with that. You get the message, right? 21, 21. 21 Cancer, 21 Capricorn. That's an exact opposition. Now, if I continue to step forward, you can see in 1 day, she's jumped from 21 to 23. So she's now separating from her opposition to Pluto. I just wanted you to visually see what this looks like. There are very specific implications to this kind of thing from secondary progressions as well. Secondary progressions really speak to our evolution as well, very strongly linked to our developmental process throughout life. Anyway, that's another subject. I'll just leave that. Okay, so just stop sharing my screen. So, where was I just a moment ago before I showed you the visual? Don't know, it might come back. So just to read, oh yes, okay. Now there is something I'd like to read to you guys, and this is important. No, I'm not going to read this today because this I've forgotten. This actually applies to Pluto and the nodes, and the very 3 distinct levels that people are evolving on when it comes to Pluto being conjunct the south node or the north node or square the nodes. I'll do a separate video on that because that's probably going to take about an hour anyway. Okay, so there's some key points for you guys to consider about a Venus-Pluto opposition and how it plays out on that evolutionary level. Let me just see if I've left anything out. There was something that I wanted to touch on. Where is it? Thanks for your patience, guys. I'm just trying to locate a page of some points that I'd made, and I'm not able to find it. Okay, look, that's fine. That will do for today. I think that just gives you guys some pointers and things to consider if you are interested in looking at your chart from an evolutionary perspective, and even if you're not, I think I have shared some points about the Venus-Pluto type of experiences. There'll be loads of people on this planet who have a Venus-Pluto aspect. But that's what we've looked at today is one dynamic in the chart. There are a number of different dynamics going on. And because we specifically focused on Venus today, then, to further understand Venus's function in your chart, then you would need to, if you had a Venus-Pluto opposition and you are considering the points that I've shared with you today, well, that Venus-Pluto opposition is going to be in a particular pair of houses, isn't it? So that would be another level of consideration. What houses is this Venus-Pluto opposition in? Are there any other aspects to this Venus-Pluto opposition? What sign or signs are the Venus and Pluto in? So those other levels are obviously going to expand the narrative, the evolution, and the evolutionary intentions of what this Venus-Pluto opposition is all about. So I just wanted to give you guys an introduction to the essential core meaning of an applying and a separating aspect between Venus and Pluto, and the aspect being the opposition, and what are some of the implications on an evolutionary level. So I'll leave it there, and see you guys really soon. Thanks so much for tuning in, and for your comments and questions and your appreciation and your love. And I send you guys so much love in return. And I'll see you guys with an update actually very soon. Much love. Bye.